Mr. President, we're here today to pass the National Defense Authorization Act. We just passed the procedural vote, so we're ready for the vote. That's going to take place tomorrow. This is the 59th year in a row that we'll be passing an NDAA.
Order in the Senate, please.
It's the 59th year in a row that will be passing an NDAA, and that's because it's the most important bill Congress will be doing all year, and one that fulfills our constitutional responsibilities, and that is to defend America. You know, there's no document, Mr. President, out there that nobody reads anymore. It's called a Constitution. If you read that document, it tells you what we're supposed to be doing here, providing for the common defense, or simply put, defending America and all who call it home. This conference report does exactly that. It's a testament to the good work we can accomplish when we work together, and I'm talking about both parties, Democrats, Republicans, the House and the Senate. The bill has been a long time coming. We started working on it here in the Senate last January, 11 months ago, holding hearings with the military leaders about what resources they need around the world. And we started drafting it not long after, and in May, we passed the bill out of our committee. Now, we passed the bill out of our committee by a 25-2 vote. That doesn't happen very often on big bills, but it did. And in June, we debated it on the floor, incorporating more than 90 bipartisan amendments before it passed with an overwhelming bipartisan vote of 86-8. Then we started the conference, where we've been working day in and day out since September. This year, we had twice the number of Big Four meetings. Now, Big Four meetings, that's the Democrat and Republican from the House, the Democrat and Republican from the Senate, getting together to iron out some of these problems, and there are a lot of problems with this bill. You know, anytime we have 90 bipartisan amendments that we're considering during the putting the bill together, that's a big deal. And we had twice the number of Big Four meetings and more than twice the number of staff-level meetings than we normally have, working our way through over 1,500 provisions within the bill. Now, I say this to remind everyone that our committee and our staff have been working on this bill tirelessly for nearly a full year, and now we're going to pass it. If I had to break it down, I would say this year's NDAA has two big overarching principles. First, it resources and aligns priorities to implement the blueprint for the National Defense Strategy Commission. This is it, Mr. President. We've been reading, this was put together by Democrats and Republicans. It's been a few years ago, as exactly what we have to adequately defend America. And we followed. This is our blueprint. We're still following it today, and it's working. This bipartisan document outlines the challenges we need to be prepared to meet, namely strategic competition with China and Russia. You know, this is something, and I don't say this critically of the previous administration, but his priorities, President Obama's priorities, were not the same as the priorities that we've had since that time and as we normally have. It was not defending America. There are other projects that he was concerned with, and as a result of this, if you take the last 5 years, that would be from 2010 to 2015, the amount of money going to the military from the president's budget, President Obama, was reduced in that 5-year period by 25%. Now, you got to keep in mind, while that was reduced by 25%, China was increasing theirs by 83%. I mean, that's never happened before. Accordingly, the conference report funds the military at $738 billion, in line with the bipartisan agreement that I just described. So we're sticking with that. You know, it's a good thing when you get a chance to get everyone together. There are always partisanship and all that, but when you get an outline like this, it's something that has actually worked and worked very good. In addition, the NDAA authorized $5.3 billion in emergency disaster recovery to help military installations. Now, you know, of course, that occasionally we'll have natural disasters. Well, we had them in Nebraska, Florida, and North Carolina that inflicted great damage on our military bases in that area. The Space Force, that was our president's big deal, and it's good. It will help us protect space and ensure America's dominance in this war-fighting domain for years to come. It's kind of interesting also. Those who are criticizing it, and I had some reluctance at first, because we're doing a pretty good job in space. We've been doing a good job in space for quite a while, but it's not all in one area, and there's this psychological thing. Our problems out there are China and Russia. China and Russia they have their own space dominance in the Space Force, and just the fact that we don't have one is something that made people believe that we didn't have the interest in Space Force when we're going to dominate Space Force. And this is the first time we've had a new branch in government in 70 years. The Space Force will help us protect space and ensure American dominance in the warfighting domain for years to come. Now, to implement the National Defense Strategy, NDAA reframes its priorities. It accelerates investment in efforts to modernize our armed forces, including creating hypersonic weapons, 5G, cyber, long-range missiles, and new equipment, areas where we are at risk. I mentioned hypersonic weapons. That's kind of the state of the art. That's what we're doing right now. And prior to the last administration, we were ahead in hypersonic weapons. At the end of that administration, 8 years later, China and Russia were ahead. Now we're catching up. We're going to pass it. And this bill is going to be a way to do this. The NDAA has strong support for nuclear modernization, preserving all three legs of the triad to maintain maximum deterrence against our adversaries. Our triad has been controversial for a long time, but it has worked, and there are some who would like to drop it down to just two forces as opposed to three. But we want to make sure that we got the best. We want to make sure we can win in a nuclear battle. It also provides needed reforms to the way the Department of Defense does business. An efficient, effective Pentagon will help America retain and in some cases regain the competitive edge. We don't have the competitive edge around the board. You know, I talk to people around the country. They always assume that America has the best of everything. And there was a time when we did. I think ever since World War II, we were in that situation. But that we lost some of that edge. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to regain it. The legislation also keeps President Trump's promise to continue rebuilding the military. The legislation invests its equipment, resources, and training needed to restore American readiness. These investments mean we'll have a larger Army, a larger Navy, a more agile Air Force, and a more lethal Marine Corps, a force that's ready to deter or, if necessary, defeat any threats that might come our way. You know, that's something that a lot of people think is extreme, but we're used to that. You know, we learned our lesson in World War II. We've gone through several conflicts since that time, and we're not going to allow that to happen again. We're going to keep all of these corps strong. And that's what the bill does to rebuild our military and realign to be able to compete with Russia and China. You know, you go through and you see the changing scene all around the world. You go to the South China Seas and you see China rebuilding or building islands out there. It's as if they're preparing for World War III. And some of our allies out in that part of the world wonder, you know, what are we doing? They don't see us out there doing it. But we are. And now this bill puts us back in that running. Now, I said that this bill does two main things. The second part is a bill that really looks out for our service members and their family. To tell the story of what we do in that area, really to tell the story of two courageous military spouses. Those two military spouses are Jana Driver and Jane Horton. Now, I've had the honor of knowing both of these women who represent the hundreds of thousands of military spouses around the country. About a year ago, Jana Driver reached out to me because she had housing, and this all started with privatizing housing. And we privatized housing, and everything went all right for a few years. Then things started dropping down. People got greedy. We had 14 contractors that they were busy doing this. And Jana Driver, she was from Tinker Air Force Base. And I had the honor of knowing her well, and because she came to me and reached out to me to share the horrible conditions that she and her family were facing in their housing at Tinker Air Force Base. Just back up a little. The privatized housing is something that was working, but things started slipping. And right now we have done a lot of work with that. So she told me about the mold in her unit and that she couldn't get a contractor to fix it. And we're talking about one of the 14 contractors that got the awards. We started looking into the problem and learned that it was bigger than this. See, I first thought when Janet Driver came to me that it was just Tinker Air Force Base. Then after that, we found it was in other places in Oklahoma. We have 5 major military establishments in Oklahoma, and we've found that they all were having some of these problems. Then I found out it was all over the nation. So this was a real serious problem that she called to our attention. So we got to work and we held hearings, inspecting homes and demanding answers, and as a result, the NDAA includes landmark overhaul of the military privatized housing system. The legislation gives military families the tools to demand accountability, re-engages military leadership. You know, it's only natural that a lot of the military leadership would say, well, we privatize it now, it's their problem, not our problem. So they kind of stepped aside. Well, they're back in the fight again. It makes sure that contractors live up to their end of the bargain and give military families high-quality housings. So that was my experience there with Janet Driver. Then there was Jane Horton. I mentioned there are two heroes that I've learned to love over the years. At an event in Collinsville, Oklahoma. Collinsville, Oklahoma is just a little bit north of Tulsa, Oklahoma. We had a town hall meeting up there, and I was ready to go. I was getting ready to go to Afghanistan at that. This happened about 7 years ago. And Jane Horton was there, the wife of someone who's in the military. And as I was getting ready, and I mentioned I was going to go to Afghanistan, she told me that her husband, Chris, was deployed there. I promised her I would visit with him when I was there in about a week's time. I never got that chance because Oklahoma Army National Guard Specialist Chris Horton was killed in action on September 9th, 2011. He was only 26 years old. After everything Jane Horton went through and after losing her husband, she was then penalized with what we refer to as the widow's tax, a dollar-for-dollar offset of the benefits as a Gold Star spouse. She came to me and we started working on it together to repeal it. Now, years after we started the process, this year's NDAA repeals the widow's tax in a fiscally responsible way. It doesn't over a period of time that is going to be livable. That's just a fraction of the other benefits it has for military families. The conference report provides a 3.1% pay raise for all troops, the largest pay raise we've had in a decade. The bill also improves access to child care on military installations. It helps spouses transfer their professional licenses. Here's a problem that people don't realize that we have, and that is that the military member is going to be moved around every 2 or 3 years. And when that happens, the spouse will go with the military member. But that spouse might be a trained professional and be working as a second worker in the household. And the problem is there are a lot of states where nurses, for example, if the spouse is a nurse, they have to wait for a year or 2 years of residency before they can actually practice in the state. Those are little things that nobody really thought of, and why it is kind of discriminatory against our military people. And so, you know, we did it, and that problem is not going to exist anymore. It continues the critical reforms to fight sexual assault and misconduct. We hear a lot about sexual assault and misconduct, and it works to improve the military health and care systems. This bill does a lot. Some people look at what we spend. I've heard people say, because there are people around, people actually in this body, who don't really think that we have a real obligation to spend so much time and money on our military. In fact, I've heard so many times people say, well, wait a minute, the United States spends more money than China and Russia put together spend, and that's true, but you got to realize why that is. We were just talking about housing. You know, China and Russia, they're communist countries. They don't care about about helping people with housing. They don't care about health care for their people. All they do is give them an AK-47, go out and kill people. So the vast majority of what we spend on military is spent on our people. Other countries don't do that. So they say you recruit a service member, but you retain a family by making our NDAA dedicated not only to the warfighter, but also to their families. Lastly, there are a few other provisions outside the jurisdiction of the Armed Services Committee, and they're worth highlighting in this bill. This has been happening now for 59 years. And one of the reasons is this is a bill everybody knows is going to pass. I had doubts this year that it was definitely going to pass, but it did. And so a lot of people have difficulty getting something passed during the regular session will wait until the defense authorization bill comes up. Then they'll put it on there as an amendment. And we have a lot of examples. The MARAD authorization, that's a maritime authorization. Senator Wicker from Mississippi put that in. He's the chairman of the Commerce Committee. Then we had intelligence reauthorization. Senator Burr is the chairman of that committee. We have that as a part of this bill. Sanctions designed to punish Syria, Russia, North Korea, China, and all those. That would really be in the Foreign Relations Committee. That's Jim Risch. Senator Risch is the chairman of that. But it's in this bill. So the result, this is a good bill, and now we're going to pass it. This is the 59th year in a row we've passed an NDAA. It's one of the few authorization bills that does pass year after year, and that's because everyone knows how important it is. It usually doesn't get bogged down in partisan fighting. This year, the process of getting to a final conference report was certainly tougher than most years. The first bill that came out of the House, there wasn't one Republican who voted for it on the floor, and they ended up supporting it. And so that's the way it happened this year, and there are some moments that we weren't sure we were going to be able to get one. It took a few months of hard-fought negotiations, but the end result was getting a bill that we can be proud of. And I want to thank Congressman Smith and Congressman Thornberry from the House, and most importantly, Senator Reid. Senator Reid is my counterpart. He's I'm the chairman of the committee, and he's the ranking member of the committee. We work together, and I'm talking about hours and hours. My wife and I have been married for, 60 years tomorrow. And I saw more of Senator Reid during this time than I saw of my own wife. But we had a lot of time together working on things. We worked together on the controversial things, and they worked. We were successful. And I want to thank also the members of the Armed Services Committee who put in good work to make sure the bill supports the military community and keeps America safe. And I want to thank President Trump for his leadership and support of the legislation, especially the Space Force. And I look forward to him signing this into law immediately. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the Armed Services Committee staff, especially the staff directors, John Bonzel for the majority and Liz King for the minority, and my personal staff who have worked in countless hours to bring this bill to the floor today. And they're also, under them, they have, from the majority, we have 33 members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and I think 15 members of the minority. So that's a total of 48 members. And I ask unanimous consent that at this point in the record, you state all 48 names of those heroes who participated.
Without objection.
From my personal staff, we had Luke Howard, Andrew Forbes, Dan Hillenbrand, Jake Hinch, Don Archer, Kyle Stewart, Brian Brody, Esther Salters, Devin Barrett, Lacey Burke, Wendy Price, Lori Fitch, Whitney Folio, Mark Powers, Brandon Ellis, and Charlotte Mitchell. And the floor staff, they're always back there. They work on all the bills, but they dropped everything to make sure this is a reality. That's Laura Dove, Robert Duncan, Chris Tuck, Megan Mercer, Tony Hannigan, Catherine Foster, Brian Canfield, and Abigail Baker. Now, let's vote this conference report. Let's let the vote be so overwhelming that there isn't a military family in America who could doubt our commitment to them. Let's use our vote to send a message as well to Russia and China that we're revitalizing America Power so that we can win the competition for influence that will shape the kind of world our children and grandchildren are going to live in. Kay and I have 20 kids and grandkids. They're the ones I'm concerned about. They're the ones you have also. We're not going to win with a strong military alone, but we will lose without one. And that's why what this NDAA will do, revitalize American military power so that we can achieve our vision of a safe, prosperous, and free world. And that's what this is all about, and that's what we're going to do. And Merry Christmas, and I yield the floor.